Number seven, seventh mistake. No doubt the most serious of all, the ambiguity of the catchword ethno-pluralism, which is worsened today by the addition of the predicate multiculturalism and by inter-ethnic communitarianism. These have been adopted by the Nouvelle Droite, and I regard them as a complete ideological impasse. Ethno-pluralism initially possessed an implicitly external meaning. All peoples are different and should be respected, yet each should live in its own land in a well-defined ethno-cultural sphere while cooperating with others. This implied a rejection of the migration flows towards Europe and of the idea of a global ethno-cultural melting pot. Actually, only Europe is the destination of these migrations. So far, so good. This is a consistent view. But the Nouvelle Droite sought to give the notions of ethno-pluralism and multiculturalism an inner meaning that stands in contrast to the first, for instance, by vehemently defending the use of the Islamic veil in schools. By acknowledging the presence of separate ethnic communities on European soil, it turns ethno-pluralism into the vehicle for a tribal, ghettoized, and perfectly American view of our society, which stands in contrast to the very meaning of the expression each folk in its own land. Ethno-pluralism has thus been distorted in such a way as to deny the notion of European folk and even of folk in general. Here, too, the public is lost. Similar stances puzzle our natural leadership, while failing to convince our enemy that we are politically correct. My criticism towards the ethno pluralism and multiculturalism of the Nouvelle Droite can be summed up as follows. Firstly, the Nouvelle Droite minimizes, either for altruism or ignorance of ethnic and socio-economic events, the catastrophe represented by demographic shifting immigration into Europe, a land which, unlike the United States, is generally only adapted to intra-European movements. There are three aspects to this catastrophe: rapid ethno-anthropological alteration, the erosion of European cultural roots, for which Americanism is less to blame, and strong economic and social setback, leading to poverty and endemic crime. The contemporary communitarian and multiculturalist discourse of the Nouvelle Droite can be interpreted as a sort of fatalism, for it sees the ethnic kaleidoscope of Europe, multiracial society, and immigration as ineluctable events we should accept and submit to, managing and putting up with them as best we can. This is a demobilizing stance which is incompatible with an ideology that regards itself as revolutionary, although ultimately it proves to be politically correct. It is a sign of weakness to justify multiculturalism by invoking globalization and the decline of the nation state, which are self evident facts. Only Europe and the United States are being made the victims of demographic colonization from the South. But while the United States can withstand it, Europe cannot. All across the world, what we are witnessing is the self affirmation of vast, homogeneous ethnic flocks, not multiracial communitarianism. The prospect of a multicultural planet is a Disneyland dream, a peace lover's error. The future belongs to peoples, not tribes. The 21st century will witness global ethnic warfare, and the legions of immigrants in Europe will serve as the fifth column of an aggressive South. This is not paranoia, it is geopolitics. To walk or drag one's feet in the footsteps of the blinding immigrationist pacifism of European leftist intellectuals is to make a serious mistake that threatens to soon lead the Nouvelle Droite to its ruin. Accusations of paranoid rhetoric against those who fear the immigrant invasion, Islamization, fundamentalism, and ethnic war, and believing that the repeated revolts in the banlieue are the work only of alienated and Americanized youths with no roots, who could be perfectly integrated if treated nicely, derives from a serious error of judgment caused by an abstract ideology that ignores social events. The ethnic war in France has already started. The barbarization of society, and the rancorous and latent aggressiveness towards European culture shown by a large portion of young people brought here by immigration constitute an intermediate term threat, as many impartial American sociologists have also observed. Why not acknowledge this? On the other hand, the Nouvelle Droite envisages a model of social harmony within a pacified multicultural society, which is sheer utopia. Every multiracial and multicultural society is multi-racist and infra-xenophobic, from Brazil and former Yugoslavia to Algeria, Black Africa, and the Caucasus. Multi-ethnicism in France will prove explosive and will have nothing to do with the placid tribalism my friends Alain de Benoit and Charles Champetier have outlined, via a discourse that may be taken as an example of the sociology of dreams. Tribalism is never peaceful. I am ready to bet that within 10 years, history, through painful experiences, will have made all multiculturalist plans unserviceable, even for those on the left. Alain de Benoit's wish is to foster a fruitful exchange of dialogue between groups that are clearly situated in relation to one another. This, in European soil, strikes me as a rather unfeasible prospect, which derives from the same ideological illusion that inspired the advocates of ethnic harmony in the 1950s America, who opposed the idea of the assimilating melting pot. Actually, I believe that both assimilators, Jacobins and people in favor of the melting pot, and communitarians are wrong. A society based on ethno territorial coexistence was, is, and will always be impossible. One land, one people. This is what human nature requires. I completely agree with the anti Jacobinism, organicism, and polycentric social view promoted by my aforementioned friends. What I reproach them for is their failure to admit that the harmonious socio cultural diversity they are talking about can be achieved only among different but related European peoples. Out and out Europeanists, why do they believe or pretend to believe that a harmonious society will be established in France through multicultural cohabitation with communities of Asian, African, and Arab Muslim origin, which are far removed from the mental framework of Europeans? Were they really consistent? They would defend the hard and abstract Republican idea of forced integration dear to Madame Badinter. In this respect, the harmonicism of the Nouvelle Droite is self contradictory. They insist on promoting a paradigm that is physically impossible to implement, submitting to the faith in miracles that characterizes egalitarian ideologies. My friends of the Nouvelle Droite have an imaginary view of Islam. They believe Islam can be integrated within a model of European harmony and general tolerance, without taking account of the fact that this ultra monotheism is an intrinsically conquering theocratic and anti democratic religion that seeks, as General de Gaulle had foreseen, to replace each church with a mosque. By its very nature, Islam is intolerant, exclusivist, and anti organic. The current thinkers of the Nouvelle Droite are captivated by the senseless talk about French Islam and fail to realize that they are facing the strategy of the fox Machiavelli so aptly described. While followers of Carl Schmitt in practice, they never apply either the concept of the exceptional case, Ernstfall, or that of the objective enemy. He who identifies you as an enemy for the very reason you exist, whatever you may do. The multiculturalism and pro-Islamic stance of the Nouvelle Droite are objectively close to the incautious positions adopted by the Catholic episcopate in France, which also believes, out of altruism, in the idea of a future harmonious and ethno-pluralist society on European soil. Stranger still is the fact that the Nouvelle Droite seems not to realize that in Muslims' eyes, pagans are absolute enemies and spawns of the devil, while they are instead tolerated, even if looked down upon by Jews and Christians. In a recent trip of mine to Saudi Arabia, I had to write Catholic on an identity card given to me on board the plane. Had I written I was a pagan or follower of any other non monotheistic religion, I would have faced some problems. To expect an agreement between paganism and Islam is like hoping to reconcile the devil with holy water. In its report on multicultural society, Elements does not discuss the issue of the impossibility of expelling illegal immigrants on account of reactions on the part of the para-Trotskyist associations and leftist Christians, nor does it discuss the social and economic cost of immigration or the ongoing arrival in Europe of immigrants from the South. Are we to steal this breach, and if so, in what way? Crucial questions such as this are never raised, yet people are waiting. There is also another problem. While each year tens of thousands of French graduates leave for the United States, France is welcoming, and in exchange for what? Tens of thousands of immigrants from the South with no qualification. Why not discuss this? Because it's taboo? That's right. I reproach the Nouvelle Droite for its adherence to a worldview that is undermined by a devastating concept, realism, which often takes the form of disheartened fatalism. I am Nietzschean and do not like the term realist. History is not realist. Communism collapsed within 3 years. Who would realistically have foreseen that? In issue 5 of Pierre Weil's magazine Terre et Peuple, historian Philippe Conrad illustrates the Spanish Reconquista against the Afro-Muslim invaders, emphasizing that in history there are no accomplished facts. The Reconquista was an unrealistic yet concrete endeavor, and it was accomplished. The essence of history is both real and unrealistic, for its motor is comprised of both fuel, will to power, and combustive, the power of will. Those who, out of weakness, choose to give in when faced by disagreeable and coercive historical events should heed the words of William of Orange. Where there's a will, there's a way. The mission of the Nouvelle Droite ought to have been to anticipate and pave the way for this path. It needs to correct its mistakes by allying itself with other groups in Europe that agree with the above analysis. The most effective ideological line would seem to lie in the simultaneously rejecting multicultural and multiracial society on the one hand, and the Republican Jacobin French nationalism that encourages it on the other. Yes to a great federal Europe, no to a multicultural and in practice multiracial France and Europe open to increasingly numerous Afro-Asiatic and Muslim communities. Number 8. Eighth and final ideological gap, the lack of an economic doctrine. I had once started suggesting an economic doctrine for the Nouvelle Droite, one centered on the notions of organic economy and autarky for wide areas, as well as on a political as opposed to economic and fiscal understanding of public authority. This doctrine called for the self-sufficiency of the great global power blocks, including Europe and later Euro-Siberia, with internal free exchange. This sort of thinking, which is compatible with the building of Europe, needed and still needs to be further developed. Why? Because as Heining Eichberg had grasped during a conversation between the two of us in Nice, 1973, in order to change public opinion and influence the course of history, it is necessary to talk about things and not merely of abstract ideas, things that interest people. Spiritualism is necessary to give the movement a soul, but it is not enough in itself. It is necessary to measure oneself with the eternal materialism of men. Like Marx, I believe that economy is part of the infrastructure of human concerns. In order to re-establish an effective ideological corpus, it is essential to possess an alternative economic doctrine. This means a return to concrete problems and social issues that affect people's lives: urbanism, transport, fiscal policy, the environment, energy policy, healthcare, birth rates, immigration, crimes, technology, television, etc. Of course, all of these remarks on the ideological mistakes of the Nouvelle Droite do not mean that I am suggesting the adoption of a dogmatic ideological line. Simply, I believe that its official doctrine is an impasse, and that if it continues to be voiced, it should be counterbalanced. A rather straightforward way for the Nouvelle Droite to regain credibility would be to launch debates. The issue of elements on multiculturalism, a central problem, would have drawn more attention had it been open to contrasting opinions. For the magazines and events of the Nouvelle Droite to regain strength, they should follow this strategy. First, raise crucial and politically incorrect problems, and two, elicit debates on various sides. I believe the Nouvelle Droite has lost influence because of its establishment of ambiguous and incomprehensible ideological axes. Its members have been too close to academia, too sophisticated, and too charmed by quasi leftist, pacifistic, utopian, and integrationist debates. It is necessary instead to take a resolute stance and make a clear break with the system by developing a radical and revolutionary school of thought. We should be wary of false wisdom and false friends, of false acknowledgments, successes, and, most importantly, false good ideas. Wrong ideas have the seductive elegance of decadence, not the modest and simple harshness of truth. An ideology can only prevail by setting itself in opposition to an already declining order. The Nouvelle Droite, and mine is a very friendly exhortation, should draw new energies from Nietzsche's philosophy of the hammer. The Nouvelle Droite, or those who will take its place on the spectrum of ideologies in Europe, will only prove successful through the virtue of courage. If, through the art of discussion and without any dogmas, they are able to develop a radical and politically incorrect thought, even through the use of current forms of expression and communication. The Nouvelle Droite has been a victim of the system or of censorship, but of itself. Nothing is lost for those capable of rising again. For today, as my friend Giorgio Loci foresaw, we are entering the dark age of storms, the interregnum, a century of battle and steel, decisive for the future of the European peoples and their offspring, an age that calls for a tragic and combative ideology. It is necessary for organizations to formulate efficient and dynamic paradigmatic ideas, original and daring ideas capable, like weapons, of averting incumbent threats. The exponents of our current of European thought must come together and adopt the optimism of pessimism. They must offer a will and access for this great fatherland that is being built amid haze and pain. Like a sleepwalker driven by his self assurance, half conscious of the threats looming over him, in a chilly turmoil, an empire is rising that does not dare yet to utter its own name. Historical thunder that is being born amid the pains of childbirth. Greater Europe, our only hope for survival. An idea is well founded only if it conforms to a concrete historical perspective, only if it is the expression of a sincere hope. New ideological paths. What follows are what I believe to be the axes and paths for an ideological generation, which I will define in more detail further on. Here are a few suggestions. 1. First is what I would term vitalist constructivism, an overall ideological framework that unites an organic and daring approach to life with the complementary worldviews of Nietzschean will to power, Roman order, and realist Hellenic wisdom. Leitmotif, a concrete, voluntaristic thought that creates order. The second axis may be defined as Archeofuturism, to envisage a future society that combines techno-scientific progress with the return to the traditional answers that stretch back into the mists of time. This is perhaps the true face of post-modernity, as removed from attachment to the past as it is from the foolish cult of keeping up with the progress. The harmonious union of the most ancient memory with the Faustian soul according to the logic of and rather than Or, intelligent traditionalism is the most powerful form of futurism and vice versa. It is necessary to reconcile Evola and Marinetti and do away with the notion of modernity produced by Enlightenment ideology. The ancients must be associated not with the moderns, but with the futurists. As the Nouvelle Droite noted, while the political and social structures of modernity are crumbling today, archaic ones are surfacing in all fields. A significant aspect of this phenomenon being the spread of Islam. Finally, the upheavals technological science and particularly genetics will cause in the future, like the tragic awakening to reality that is bound to take place in the 21st century, will require a return to an archaic mentality. Modernism increasingly appears as a form of attachment to the past, yet it is not a matter here of embracing classic traditionalism, which is tinged with folklore and yearns for a return to the past. Modernity has grown obsolete. The future must be archaic, neither modern nor attached to the past. Third axis. To envisage the death throes of the European nation state and European revolution as the central political events of the 21st century. This implies the need to jump on the wagon of unification, if for no other reason than to correct its faults, even if, to use Lenin's words, it is useful idiots who are building the EU. Great revolutions never take place in a linear and vaunting way, as dogmatic and romantic intellectuals like to think. The painful gestation and the unification of the European peoples in their shared land, extending at first from Brest to the Oder and then from Brest to Bering, is an underlying movement that conceals an imperialist drive. This represents a reaction to decolonialization, the demographic crisis, and immigration, and is possibly the solution to many problems that currently appear unsolvable. Euro Siberia is what we must now envisage. The assumption behind all of this is the idea that the Earth, a global village and interdependent habitat, cannot be managed, particularly for environmental reasons, by a range of different national actors, but must rather be directed by a limited number of imperial blocs. Greater Europe, India, China, North America, Latin America, the Muslim world, Black Africa, and Peninsular Asia. No doubt there is a still distant scenario. Yet the role of thinkers is to foresee the future. Today we must launch the idea of a United States of Europe. Fourth axis. To think about the fact that in the 21st century humanity will face a convergence of catastrophes. I will further develop this essential point later on. When forced with their backs against the wall, human societies always react. A series of macro lines of catastrophe are converging towards a breaking point situated somewhere in the early 21st century, an environmental, economic, and military apocalypse brought about by faith in miracles, including the belief that development can continue indefinitely without posing the risk of general collapse. The egalitarian civilization sprung from modernity is now witnessing its last good days. We must now think about the aftermath of the catastrophe. We must already start developing the vision of an archaeofuturist world for the aftermath of the chaos. Fifth axis, to think about the conflict between North and South that is emerging, a possible Third World War, and the role Islam may assume as a symbolic banner of revenge. This calls for a redefinition of the notions of the enemy and an objective threat. We, we must be wary of all erudite talk about the harmlessness of any global Islamic front and tackle the issue of ethnicity, which may be added to the environmental and economic issues of the new Iron Century in the making. In this view, we should stop always portraying southern countries, and particularly Africa, as the eternal victims of the evil schemes of northern countries. The neo-colonialist martyr myth should come to an end. Each folk shapes its own destiny. We should have the courage to treat poor countries as respectable actors rather than victims. Africa's misfortunes are chiefly caused by Africans themselves. We cannot continue to beat our chests and act in their place. The Nouvelle Droite must distance itself from the paternalistic post-colonial masochism of the entire European intelligentsia, be it of the left or the right. Sixth axis, related to the first, is the United States as enemy, a potential destructive invader or an opponent, i.e., a debilitating rival on the cultural and economic level. Does the United States, the only superpower for only 20 more years, according to the Brzezinski, really represent the chief enemy? Is it more dangerous than the South? I believe we are now closer to the Russians, our former absolute enemies, than we are to the Americans, our former absolute friends. Yet, by already seeing them ourselves as Euro-Siberians, we must envisage a strategy of agreement or conflicting cooperation with America against a major threat from elsewhere. A clear break must be made with the myth of the United States as an invincible superpower. The US is powerful because Europe is weak. It imposes nothing on us by force, unlike what the former USSR used to do with Central European countries. The American Imperial Republic is right, from its point of view, to practice soft imperialism. We must gain control of our own destiny. We must be capable of distinguishing our mortal enemies from a rival opponent and in any case adopt a policy of self-affirmation. 7. It is necessary to focus on the epistemology of technique. Problems are not computer science and genetic engineering about to explode the framework of hegemonic egalitarian ideology by creating an abyss between what is real and what is desirable, between nature and ultra-nature? These are crucial questions that concern biology and computer science. We must resume the debate we broke off concerning biology, as transgenic techniques today make it impossible to intervene in the process of genetic transmission, which until recently were exclusively natural phenomena beyond the grasp of all intervention. We are already capable of creating farm animals without gestation in incubators and shall soon be capable of doing the same with human beings. By combining advanced computer systems with transgenic techniques, we will be able to program the gene pool and hence the abilities of second-generation humans. From corn to sheep and from sheep to humans. An additional problem, third-generation computers will enable the creation of a virtual universe or simulated anti-world that will look more real than the real world, with genuine and autonomous hyper-virtual and three-dimensional characters. For computer intelligence is dawning. Those who contemptuously claim that these are only machines are making a serious mistake. These new blows against anthropocentrism, delivered by man himself, remind us that technological science is the Faustian spirit in action. Is this a deadly hazard for man, a diseased animal and evolutionary failure? Or is it a destiny that can be governed, such as the philosophical questions that every intellectual movement worthy of this name must address? 8. It is necessary to reflect on the issue of immigration, which represents a form of demographic colonization of Europe at the hands of mostly Afro-Asiatic people, and not an invasion as put by the demagogue Giscard, the author of the new regulations regarding family reunification. Native Europeans are historically and objectively finding themselves in a situation not identical but very close to that of the American Indians and North African peoples in the 19th century, when they witnessed the arrival of the European settlers who had left an overpopulated continent. 3 generations later, the colonization of Europe represents a form of revenge against European colonialization. In organizing a reaction, it is necessary to shift the center of the debate. This is not simply a cultural or socio-economic problem, as those discussing the issue would like to believe. It is a global anthropocentric problem. It will be necessary to clearly emphasize this methodological distinction in the answer given. The real problem. Are we to accept or reject a substantial alteration of the ethnocultural substrate of Europe? The basis of intellectual honesty and the key to ideological success lie in the ability and courage to address the real problems instead of attempting to avoid them. 9. To envisage a two-tier global order, given the technological, social, and environmental impossibility of extending the logic of progress and development, i.e., faith in miracles, to the entire planet. Could we not imagine and foresee a scenario where most of humanity reverts to living in traditional societies that consume little energy and are socially more stable and happy, while in the context of globalization, a minority continues to live according to the techno industrial model? Might there be two parallel worlds in the future, the worlds of a new Middle Ages and of hyperscience? Who would be living in each of these worlds and in what numbers? All daring and creative thought must think the unthinkable. I believe that Archeofuturism, an explosive meeting of opposites, is the key to the future simply because the paradigm of modernity is no longer viable on a global scale. 10. In this perspective, it is necessary to reflect on the economic issue of autarky for wide spaces, which may include Euro-Siberia, and the moving beyond both socialism and liberalism by reviving the idea of an organic economy of the third way that may be inspired both by genuine liberalism and genuine communitarian socialism. We must think about the ongoing transformation of economic systems into neo-feudal networks and radically redefine the role of superior political authority, which must politically direct the economy, but not manage it. We must envisage great semi-autarkic blocks which may have different modes of production and consumption, and within which interlinked but diverse types of society and economy may exist. Could ultra technological areas connected by the global communications network border with neo archaic areas where the ways of life of and production of traditional societies have been restored? A current of thought is strong if it manages to pose crucial yet unexpected questions, if it acts in advance, particularly if those do so with a non dogmatic language. In order for an ideology of revolution and restoration to emerge in this age of great challenges, where vital matters are at stake and catastrophes loom near, it is necessary to reformulate the old notion of conservative revolution, which I consider outdated. All the young forces, which are so few in these videophonic times, must unite on a European scale and forget about parochial disputes, hierarchically defining according to the non-exclusivist and polytheistic logic of and the worldview that unites them and the doctrines that launch the debate. Ideology will follow later. Finally, it would be necessary to balance critical discourse on the interregnum period with a precursory, assertive, and optimist discourse within our pessimistic view of the present, which may apply to the aftermath of the chaos. The keystone of our current of thought is an agreement of an historical kind on the notion of Europe. All of us, each according to his dreams, analyses and temperament, which, to move beyond the obtuse nationalism of Enlightenment egalitarianism and contribute to build this macro-continental union of brother peoples, preparing the idea of it for the aftermath of the catastrophe. All this in conformity with an organic and democratic imperial logic, without forcibly conforming ourselves to others and destroying the historical heritage represented by our various languages and ethno-cultural sensitivities, which constitute Europe's unique treasure. These are the words of Pierre Vial, one of the leaders of the Front National, a French nationalist party, and founder of the cultural association Terre et Pupille. This is the real purpose of our struggle, to fight for a rooted cultural identity which is both French and European, and which harmoniously combines the Greco-Roman, Celtic, and Germanic heritages. Each of these is dear to us, for it is an aspect of one and the same civilization. All those who are fighting to preserve this civilization are our brothers in arms. We must become soldiers of the idea again, and in a flexible yet articulated manner, federate all currents of thought, periodicals, books, and associations, following the same line on a European scale. What struck me when I started reading publications from our movement again, and this was only recently because I hadn't been interested in such things for a while, was the existence in Italy, Germany, Belgium, France, Croatia, Spain, Great Britain, Russia, Portugal, etc., of men, magazines, movements, and associations that all adhere to a broadly similar worldview. But I was also struck by the dispersion, personal contrasts, and heated parochial spirit of some people. A, a synergic movement of this kind that cuts across currents and tendencies, converging on the axial ideas I outlined above, will only manage to carve a place for itself in history if driven by proactive idealism rather than neutral intellectualism. May my talented friends of the Nouvelle Droite benefit from these few words of advice to yet again find their path in history. Perhaps they could start by changing their name.